Shame, 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 shame.
It breaks down boundaries and it makes the children more promiscuous as they grow older.
The row over the teaching of relationship and sex education in Birmingham primary schools could be seen as an inevitable clash between liberal values and religious conservatives.
We are having our children come home with material that contradicts our moral values.
Parents are very angry.
Say no to undermining parental rights and authorities.
The protests in Birmingham started because of an equality programme called No Outsiders. The lessons are about embracing differences, including race, religion, gender, age and disability, as part of the legal requirement to comply with the Equalities Act. But it was specifically the teaching around LGBT issues and storybooks featuring same-sex families which drew criticism from the mainly Muslim parents at the school. They feel their religious values, which are also protected under the Equalities Act, are under threat. Amir Ahmed is one of the protest organisers.
It's not about gay, lesbian rights and equality. This is purely about proselytising a homosexual way of life.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Today we have a different type of podcast, something that we've never done before. I got a message, and a lot of people get a ton of messages, and this one I answered from a young man. He's 20 years old, and he's Turkish, English, Bengali. You're son of son of Earth, basically. He's son of man. Lives in England, and he wanted to talk to me about share some stories. So I said, okay, 20-year-old from England. I'm not from, don't you always talk to some youth from England? So we talked, and we had such a good discussion on Zoom. We talked on Zoom that I thought, I want to share some of these discussions with people, because I know that a lot of parents are probably their youth could really relate to this young man. His name is Odin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And as I said earlier, he's really son of man, being from Anatolia, Europe, and South Asia, and then living, in England. Obviously, he's a mainstream traditional Muslim, Sunni Muslim, studying Arabic and Islamic studies at Leeds, University of Leeds. Where's Leeds again?
So Leeds in the northeast of England.
Northeast England.
And I'm living in the northwest. But I actually grew up in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, so that's another.
Yeah, you don't have a Liverpool accent. You're from Liverpool, right?
No. Yeah, so my dad's family, they're from Bangladesh originally, but they migrated to Liverpool. So all my cousins have Liverpudlian accents, but I don't.
Okay, good. Now, the reason that you talked is that you were concerned about the way people talk about this matter, and the issue is that in my opinion, if you ask me, the issue of the theoretical position on the LGBT community, the LGBT, movement and wave, right, is, I think it's been covered so much. But what you brought to the table was the experience with people, who are like dependents of LGBT families, basically. Right. And that's a whole different thing, which is basically you had a classmate and a long discussion with a classmate who has two moms, which that not necessarily, that's, not something that my generation ever dealt with. Right. Because it wasn't, the matter wasn't old yet. Now it's matured. I should say it hadn't matured. Now it's matured to the point that, that exists. And she's lived her whole life with these two moms who are obviously lesbians. And the main point here being is that when people take on an aggressive posture or a disgusted posture, okay, and at that point, you may get your point across to the person who's maybe bringing something new in your religion that you're upset about, but you're completely doing something different to an innocent person.
Yeah.
So now there are dependents on this matter. And why don't you lead by telling us exactly what went on in that discussion and that conversation, which made you think that the way in which we discuss this matter needs to be tweaked so that we can add in consideration for people who we're still trying to give dawah to, that are, you know, they themselves haven't done this stuff, but they've been raised in it. So why don't you tell us that story?
Okay, so it actually happened when I was still at school. So I'm at university now, but this was a case when I was in my last years of school, and I'd set up a kind of interfaith discussion club in my school at lunchtimes, and a lot of my friends came. And the reason I set it up is because I had friends of all different backgrounds. So some were like really practicing Christians, some were atheists, a couple were Muslim, and it was a really interesting. We were having kind of really interesting discussions, and so we set up this club. And there was this girl there who was in my year, and we'd kind of been on perfectly fine terms before that. We weren't ever, there was nothing ever, you know, there was nothing ever, any tension or kind of or anything between us before this. And this interesting thing was that after this discussion, there wasn't anything tense or any kind of, you know, awkwardness between us either, despite the fact that it was a discussion about where I was perfectly clear and uncompromising and kind of and straight up about what I believe as a Muslim who adheres to the kind of mainstream consensus on this issue from my religion. And despite the fact that she is the daughter, you know, of you know, a lesbian couple, right? And so you kind of expect, and I've had discussions with other people in the past where it's gone like this, where people get outraged and be like, this is ridiculously unethical, and there's just a lot of outrage and kind of and shutting down the debate, and this is discriminative, and this is prejudice, and this is phobic, right? But this was a discussion where, as I said, afterwards we were on fine terms, despite me being so clear about the Islamic position on this, and the fact that I adhere to that Islamic position.
So the thing is that it's oftentimes sold to us that the you know, the tolerance position, you know, is an absolute like it's an absolute law. It's an absolute, it's a given. It's something that cannot possibly, you know, be questioned. And I think that there's a news clip about, you know, what happened in terms of the Birmingham marches against this matter, where the journalist sort of takes that position, and she like her tone of voice, and she used that position like, are you actually like, it's almost like making the person sound insane if they don't accept and have a complete tolerance of a certain thing. Right. Whereas, you know, if they entered through the door of tolerance, they actually slammed that door shut after they got in. Right. If you notice that it started off with tolerance, but the tolerance of any other view is no longer there. And oftentimes calls to unity are often just calls to, you know, this opinion, right? Our opinion on this, you know. And so when we talk about people, like when we talk about the family members of people involved in this, we have to realize that this is something that, you know, is people will always be attached to their parents, and we have to maybe, you know, employ the saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or his teaching, that Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, he's coming as a Muslim. So, of course, he had converted, and we're not talking about converts in general. We're talking about regular people, but who aren't Muslim. But when Ikrimah came amongst the Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ said, don't curse Ikrimah, for his son is amongst us now. I mean, don't curse Abu Jahl, for his son is amongst us now. Well, what that indicated is that even though Ikrimah had professed Iman and rejected idolatry, he's still going to have some kind of attachment to his father. Right.
Yeah.
If not, you know, an attachment, a sensitivity, we can say, because we can say, let's say, okay, he made complete bara'ah from him personally, like, khalas, I'm completely cut off from you, you know, for what you did to the Prophet. I said, I'm fine. but you'll still have a sensitivity, and you'd be offended
Of course, yeah.
by someone insulting them.
Mhm.
So, and this discussion here is not for the whole Twitter world that wants always, to bring something dramatic and sound the alarm bells. This discussion is for, the other people who are in your shoes or who are parents. And I know in my community, parents of high schoolers who deal with this, where a position of outrage,
Mhm.
while it may be your position, it also has a cost,
Mm.
right? Now, of course, we're outraged, rationally speaking, meaning that we will not budge on a subject. And we have, emotions are both rational and natural, right?
Mhm.
The rational is your priority, where you believe in something or not believe in something. Just like rational love of the Prophet ﷺ, it is rational and emotional. The rational is that before I do anything, I consult with the Prophet's Sunnah.
Yeah.
And emotional is that I love to remember him,
Yeah.
right? Both of them are excellent, right?
Mhm.
So likewise, when we meet sins, now we should be rationally outraged in the sense that I will not even budge an inch nor give a millimeter to this view. But emotionally speaking, you end up having to control yourself for the sake of the onlooker and for the sake of those who have grown up immune to this matter.
Yeah.
And that was the point that struck me about this conversation. So how did you put it to the person? And it's not the words that I'm looking for here. It's the emotion, right?
Right.
Which is the emotion of, if you flip out on this, you lose this person for good. Right. So tell me about how you actually ended up, talking in that respect.
Well, I think you brought out some really good points there, and in terms of this specific conversation, I was very much conscious of the fact that, how like in Islam, there's this idea that maybe potentially one of the only justifications you have for living as a minority in a non-Muslim society is your dawah responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And that was very much at the forefront of my mind when I was researching this topic, when I was discussing it with this individual, when I've looked into it at university, etc. And it's the idea, again, that we're not, there was this brilliant thing that was circulated recently called something along the lines of Pirate Dawah on the internet.
Yep.
And it's this idea that, that you so sort of almost like the aggression is palpable in when you speak. And you end up, sure, you get a victory in that moment, a little soundbite or a clip for YouTube where you can entitle it, ending this person's career or whatever, and you can win in that sense. But it's such a great cost, in terms of thinking long term. You put like 20 people off by the time that you've brought this one person to Islam. And I guess that's kind of what was at the forefront of my mind. Dawah for me is very much about wishing to see the best in all of God's creatures and to understand their hurts and to see His image right behind their veil. And that's something that I got from Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, and I was really taken by that because I thought, this is a girl whose parents are too like I just think about my own attachment to my own mom and dad, right? And then imagining kind of the confusion, the sense of cognitive dissonance, whatever that might come from being confronted with somebody who you seem to be on fine terms with before, but suddenly is against the very facts of your parents' relationship. Like, so these are things, and you mentioned the Birmingham, the issue that we had here in Birmingham in the UK made national news coverage, as you said, BBC, Sky News, everyone picked it up. It was headline news for months actually here in the UK, and that was again my concern, was that there are kids walking past these angry Muslim parents who are protesting, and in some of the instances it got into kind of mocking and shouting and things like that, and I'm thinking, well, it's not like you said, it's not like it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There are now kids that are walking to school with two moms at home and two dads at home, You know, what about their impression of Islam? What about our duty towards them to not increase their confusion and their dilemma, but actually bring a healing to it, right? Bring a clarity in terms of a way of life, right? Our way of life and our understanding of this issue of same-sex attraction, of transgenderism, of all these issues is, in our opinion, a fitri one, right? It's part of our natural disposition. It should come naturally to us. The Islamic view is something that should bring people peace and healing if understood correctly and delivered clearly. And so that's our game. That's our objective, rather. So
Yeah, that's our objective, and I think that a lot of times the emotional element of persuasion is left off, and to persuade somebody to your cause is better than simply bludgeoning, a person and then putting off 1,000 other people from your cause.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea here that we take into consideration the secondary level, the second generation that has, just grown up with this. It's completely innocently. It's not their fault. I think is a priority in Dawah, because our purpose is to call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, it's more important to make sure that the Muslims understand their deen. Now, why is it so difficult to maintain both? How are they mutually exclusive?
Exactly.
Right? It's not mutually exclusive at all. And all it takes is some emotional discipline. And really, just, it's a factor now. You have a math equation.
Yeah.
Okay. And now you have a new part of the equation. And this new part of the equation, it basically tells us, listen, we as Muslims simply, not only, we're not just, we can't support this. We're also against anything other than a man and a woman marrying.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
Marriage between a man and woman. Anything against sexual relations between a man and a woman, husband and a wife, I should say, not just man and a woman, but husband and a wife. And that's our belief. Right.
And actually, for context, there was this whole thing in the Birmingham thing, that it was an objection to these lessons that were being taught in the schools.
Yeah.
And little, young children, primary school children, were being read stories by their teachers entitled things like Two Male Penguins in Their Chick, Julian is a Mermaid, right, where this boy wants to be a mermaid, My Princess Boy, where he just, and it's very clear for us as Muslims, right? I think back to ayat from the Quran, about Prophet Lut alayhi salam. We have to think carefully about this, in the sense that our religion, and this is kind of my research interest at university, is how is Islam designed specifically? How is it kind of interwoven into the faith, where it's deliberately meant to be a religion to protect us against the kind of extremes of the modern world, right?
Yeah.
And there's this, it's not, you'd almost laugh at the idea that someone thinks it's accidental that Allah has quoted his prophet in this book, alayhi salam, referring to Lut alayhi salam, in for our age. So there's ayat, for example, in Surah Al-Araf. I'm just reading the interpretation here. You lust after men rather than women. You transgress all bounds. That's clear. There's no way that we should feel embarrassed about that as Muslims. There's no way that we should feel anything but at peace with that as Muslims. There's another ayah in Surah Al-Hijr, right? Again, just the interpretation in English, ayah number 71. He said, "My daughters are here if you must." Right? That's an interesting one to reflect on, and it's absolutely clear in terms of our Islamic position here. We can't, as you said, we can't budge in terms of going against the consensus of the ulama for 1400 years longer. We can't budge against the Quran. We can't budge against any of this stuff. We can't accept the idea that our kids, maybe not my kids, but Muslim kids, are being taught in school, right, about, and being read stories about the idea that it's fine to be a girl if you want to change and be a girl, or be a boy if you want to, like that. We can't move on that. But at the same time, there are little kids who might get bullied in school by Muslim children for having two parents of the same sex at home. and that's as far as, as far as our duty to be a healing power, a source for bringing about healing and clarity and peace. That's unacceptable as far as we're concerned as Muslims. So we have to deal with this with compassion,
100%. And when you're confident in a belief and you're doing something in the right way, there is a realization that sometimes less is actually more. And I say that in the reaction element of things, because having been around, and anyone who's been around, human beings and tried to persuade them of anything, that you have to read reactions. And if your reaction is going to be, you push people away because of how badly you flew off the handle, then you must have not had, any, teenage kids that you ever dealt with, or any people that you dealt with, because you realize that, hold on a second, I want to fly off the handle, but we're not guided by our impulses, even if our impulse is good, because it's good to fly off the handle, in an appropriate times. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, we won't use the phrase fly off the handle with a great prophet, but we will say that Prophet Musa got extremely angry to the point that he threw the tablets, right? He threw the tablets. Now, let's fast forward. There was a time where Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam received a delegation from Thaqif, and they said to him, we're willing to enter into submission to your religion, to Islam. This is the year 9 after the Hijrah. And he said to them, but they said, but we have one condition. We travel a lot. We need to do zina. So we need you to exempt us of zina, right? How did the Prophet react? What if he had reacted in the way that most of us would react, whether sarcastically or reacting with some kind of emotion? They would have fled away. So whether or not you people want to argue it or not, it's not about arguing. Look at the result. When you fly off the handle on a matter, even if you should, it theoretically, like it's an absolute no, and it's an abomination what you're uttering. But how does my way of expressing myself get me a result? Will it get me a result or not? And that's really the question here. And people have to realize that we have to eventually broach this topic you'd have to do this in everything if you're raising people or trying to convince them of anything.
And that's an interesting point, because these individuals, these prophets, peace be upon them, when they got angry, it was without ego. It was in a pure way, right?
That's a great point. It's a great point.
Yeah, and we don't, we're not maybe we're definitely not on that level, but even if we're trying to be, we can't ever guarantee that when we fly off the handle, to use your term, that it's not muddied by our own egos, right? And so I think it's that idea of looking wishing to see the best in all God's creatures, and to be healing, and to be thing without ever compromising on your deed. You have to be firm and clear about your Islamic position on this.
Yeah.
And it's an issue when people are not firm and clear, because that just creates more confusion. That's unacceptable, frankly. But
it's a completely unacceptable to muddy the waters on something. And honestly, even certain discussions on details, they oftentimes they may be meant for scholarly footnotes, but they just confuse the common person. And even that's probably, you could say, inappropriate to be done in certain public Dawah settings, right? And an example to say, as an example, the difference between something that would remove someone from Islam and something that would just be sinful, or something that would make someone an innovator.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if you speak in a way that you deny the graver accusation, it may come across as a defense to the common person.
Yeah.
For example, if someone says, all right, I don't feel like praying witr, right? Is this person a sinner or innovator or what? And someone says, oh, he must be an innovator. I said, no, he's not an innovator. He's just sinful, right? So we've removed you've taken the issue and defended the person a little bit by saying he's not that bad. He's in the middle. But an appearance standpoint, it sounds like you're defending them, right? And that is dangerous to do when you're talking about something in a public setting. It ends up causing confusion as well. And there are over 200 ayat speaking about clarity, in matters of deen. And I remember back in 2015, when we first started the Sincerity podcast, that I was in a phase where this woke stuff was really just starting to catch on with people and amongst Muslims. And I had a really serious reaction to it. And sometimes, and halfway through, that first season, I thought to myself, are we trying to convince people or are we trying to crush them?
Right.
And I came upon a saying of a Shafi'i about debates and about these things. He said, remove the sickness, don't kill the patient.
Yeah.
And in that, I think you will turn off people who are looking for an extreme. And that may be their ego needs to get it out of their system, right? Where that's what they're looking for, blood. And sometimes we can't deliver that. Sometimes the reaction needs to be a bit clear, but I would say tempered. That's the language I would say. It needs to be clear. Why? Because there are other people watching that are innocent, and they're going to be they're going to completely shut off Islam from their minds forever for good. Right. And
but I also think it's, sorry to interrupt there, I just also think it's about sincerity, right? In the sense that when people get into these debates, if they're too harsh and they're almost overly kind of aggressive and crushing people, that's no longer da'wah,
Yeah.
It just isn't. And then on the flip side, when people get into these discussions and people are overly compassionate, and I don't mean truly compassionate, I mean just overly sensitive and understanding to a point where it's just getting a bit extreme now and in excess and kind of pushing the boundaries of Islam.
Yeah.
That's no longer compassion either. Because for compassion to be true compassion, it has to be clear. You can't compromise on the deen. Otherwise, you're not being compassionate. You're being the opposite of that. So it's a balance about being, really, in the middle and kind of, and just getting that balance, I think.
I totally agree that this idea of compassion, if you're not what is the compassion for? The immediate moment, or do we believe in an afterlife too?
Exactly.
We believe that there is Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has certain things that does not want us to do, right? And there's a message, there is a dawah here, right? And there is hellfire here. And so when we're compassionate about that as much as anything else. So compassion would be to lead people to Islam and away from their current, like the Shahada begins with a negation. There is no God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we want them to move away from what they're upon. We don't want them upon what they're upon. It's not right, right? So, I mean, we believe not only it's not true, it's not like it's incorrect. No, it's going to cause you a big problem.
Right. It's not the best thing for you in this life or the next.
Yeah. Not only that, it's a very bad thing for you in this life and the next. We have to actually, I don't think a lot of people believe that deeply, like viscerally as it's supposed to be. Like you believe that someone who chooses to play, racing games on the street, right? People who race in cars on the street. Well, you totally have your gut will squeeze up if you heard that, let's say your brother, little brother, or someone is doing that and going 90 miles an hour racing on the highway with his friends, because we know that doesn't end up good, right? At the very least, you're going to probably get your license taken away from you for like 5 years, if not get into an accident. So your gut squeezes because you know that right now this could affect him. Whereas, as Ibn Qayyim says, certain things, people do them for their entire hayat dunya and don't see the harm of it until the afterlife, right? And beliefs, religious beliefs are, from them, from amongst the things that people don't see the negative result of it, like visually, except in the afterlife is religious beliefs. So we tend to feel like less of a direct feeling that this is terrible. Right?
But do you know what? I think that comes from an insecurity on our part, on too many of our part as Muslims. Like people don't believe enough
Yeah.
that the Islamic position on this issue is they don't feel it in their hearts that it's the right thing. And one of the, a really interesting thing when I had this discussion with this girl in school at this debate club, one of the really interesting points that she actually admitted to me was that her two mums, as they were having her little brother,
Mhm.
they were really concerned about not having a male figure in the household, and it like to the point where like, they were like really discussing it with one another, and kind of like they were really concerned about the ethics of
Of what they're
of
doing.
is this fair on this little boy who doesn't have a father figure role model in his house.
Mhm.
Are we doing the right thing? And that was such an interesting thing. And you know what, she only admitted that to me. That only came out in our discussion
Mhm.
because of the way that I was discussing the issue. I wasn't You can't afford to go up in flames and be insulting and this, that, the other, and let your potentially your ego take over you in that kind of. You just can't afford it. Not only is it not the right, potentially not the right thing to do if your
Yeah.
ego's in the way, right? But also it's just not practical. Firstly, there'll be consequences,
Mhm.
So there was this in 2009 in the UK, in a place called Islington here in the UK. There was this case of this a Christian who was a registrar and was didn't want to perform civil kind of what do you call it, like not marriages but civil partnerships
Yeah.
between same-sex couples because of their faith, right?
Mhm.
And they took and it went to court, and it was a whole big thing, and they lost. So they tried to get exempt because of their beliefs as a Christian,
Yeah.
to not be forced to perform these civil partnerships between these same-sex couples.
Mhm.
And they lost. They weren't able to be accepted from that. They said, basically, the court said, no, you've got to do that by law. You're required to do that if you're in this job. And so they had to leave their job eventually. So it has real consequences, and sometimes those consequences have to be accepted because you're sticking to your principles, like in this
Yeah.
situation. But you just can't do anything about it. You're going to have those consequences, and sometimes you can actually avoid them by just dialing down and toning down the shouting and the ego and the kind of almost, it comes across as a real lack of compassion. And it's not by accident that the most common names, the most frequent names that Allah describes Himself by in the Quran, right, are Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. That's meant to be important to us, right? So it's meant to be at the heart of our deen. So if we can strike that balance of being uncompromising on the one hand and
Yeah.
clear about our views, but still compassionate and have genuine and sincere da'wah in at the forefront of our minds, then I think then you're onto
Then
the
we,
way forward.
we would say that, as say Umar used to say, asabta sunnah, which is now you hit the target of the sunnah,
Mm,
and all you have to look at is taqif. There's nothing, worse for people to have done than to mock the prophet,
mhm,
to spit on him, throw stones at him, hurl, curse him.
mhm,
And what did he do? He was thinking for their innocence, right?
mhm.
Their children. Like, well, maybe guidance will come to their children.
Right.
Whereas he had the opportunity, as we know, that the angel came down and said, I'm
Mhm,
the angel in charge of these mountains, and Allah has informed me that I
mhm.
will push these mountains and destroy the city
Wow.
on
Yeah.
them, right? To push the mountains on them, kill them all. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, I hope that their children, will say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. So
Mm,
that element of compassion is, if you notice, they themselves did become Muslim. Their chiefs
mm,
became Muslim afterwards. And those very chiefs that were involved in that incident,
mhm,
about more than a decade later, they enter into Islam. And so
mhm,
it's not just the second generation, but the sinner as well. That
mm,
you don't now, and I have to say something. The people who flip out, they're not the enemy here, right? Because at the same time, it is a reaction that is, to something bad. And you might be inaccurate and you don't represent the sunnah, That's very different from saying that you're the enemy, you're worthy of being mocked, you're terrible, you're the reason. No, but it is worthy of saying this is not the sunnah, right? And I had done it several times and flipped out on people in the past and realized, how do I represent the prophet like this, right? And I feel terrible afterwards for days, and I have to make it up, right? And I think you were referencing some of these marches where, you know, sometimes I think it maybe got out of hand or something, where I guess people were emotional about it, right? They were really, really upset about the situation. But I think though that you are correct 100% in this issue where if we don't fully embrace the sunnah, all of it, then we can't really say that we're 100% a hujjah, you know, against the people, you know, in what I mean by that, a hujjah is when are people considered guilty in the sight of Allah? They're considered guilty when the message has come to them with no external, with no external matters that could cause a person to justifiably say no, thank you, right? And what's an example that an example of this is when a person, if a person was to come to you as a complete stranger and tell you this is XYZ is not right, or you have to do it, or let's say you got to go and say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Even for us, that is not a da'wah. You're not obligated to listen to strangers in Islam. We don't. A Muslim who comes to us and says, the Prophet, a random Muslim, I don't know him, said, Prophet said, at this time, at this hour, you must pray such a rak'ah, right? I would say to him, you know, I don't even know who you are. I'm not accepting anything you have to say, and I'm not obligated really, you know, whether I'm obligated to investigate it, you know, that's different, right? But I don't know who you are. I'm not responsible in that regard, right? If I have, for example, a knowledge that a certain food is, a restaurant is halal, absolute stranger comes up to me and says not halal. So I have certainty from the owner that it's halal, who I know, and he prays with us in the masjid. And a complete stranger tells us not halal. I don't even have to investigate that, right? Your word as a complete stranger is zero. So that's what I mean by an external factor that would justify for people to reject the message. So if I come with, whether it's my nafs or my undisciplined self or a half sunnah, I'm coming with the obligation, but I'm not fulfilling it in the way in which the Prophet would have done things, right? At that point, we are giving an excuse for people not to accept our message. An excuse which may or may not stand in front of Allah, right? But it's definitely an excuse. You know, if someone comes and says, oh, these people are insane, right? Shouting and screaming their heads off like that, right? Yeah, maybe we are guilty of giving them an out. So I want to say that while at the same time saying those people flipping out, I can't say that they're the enemy. I simply say, and they're not worthy of being mocked. I believe they're worthy of being praised because they still care about Allah and they care about the messenger. But I don't see that they fulfilled the sunnah. And that's a problem. It is a problem to have not fulfilled the sunnah. And we have to think about this, that there's multiple dimensions here. And this dimension of the onlookers and those who are raised in something, they have to be taken care of in the sense of we have to be considerate of them and what they have to say.
Yeah, and I think that there's another aspect to this. I've recently taken up driving lessons. I got to them really late, but my driving instructor, he on the first lesson, he told me, it came out, we were talking about, he started talking about Catholicism for some reason, then we started chatting, and then he admitted it to me that he let me know rather that his son had committed suicide, right? And since then, this is a really chatty, really nice guy, we get on really well. But every lesson since then, I've noticed it's palpable in the air, his grief, like constantly. Like there's no, like, I don't know I don't know how you deal with that as a parent, but it's literally like, we'll make a joke and he'll be really just fine with me, just talking to me. but you can still see it, you can still feel it almost coming from him, that it just is unrelenting, his grief. And I'm sat here thinking, okay, there's 100% a right to get angry for the sake of Islam. That's a part of our deen. But maybe some of us should think, on this issue, when there's such high suicide rates, when it's affecting, amongst transgender people, etc., when it's skyrocketing through the roof, when there are kids of people of same sex, where they've got same sex parents at home, same gender parents at home, when it's so sensitive nowadays, when it's changed, when it's become so extreme, and it's moving so fast, right? In the last 5 years, the last 10 years, the conversation has moved radically and rapidly in one big progressive with a capital P direction, right? So it's just getting even worse, even more going more in that direction.
Yeah.
How can we afford for to be taking kind of like to even potentially letting our ego get in the way in these conversations, and kind of, it's a big, and it's happened way too much. So for example, in this BBC coverage of this Birmingham thing, they found a group chat that these Muslim parents who were protesting were on some social media platform, and the BBC got access to this group chat, and they leaked the messages on their channel, or rather they exposed the messages, and there were messages along the lines of, and I'm quoting here, Muslim parents saying things like, "I'm totally against any type of gays and lesbians, astaghfirullah, what is this dunya coming to, dirty, filthy excuse for a human," etc., etc. And the BBC got hold of these, and it was on national news. And bear in mind that the majority of people consider this an issue like racism. They see homophobia like racism. That's how strongly so many people feel. And bear in mind that Muslims are completely on the other side of this. This is we can't accept a lot of this stuff, most of this stuff, outright 100% without compromising on our deen. So we've got to be a bit smart about this, right? We've got to be a bit compassionate, a bit smart, and deal with it in a way that we recognize that people are really hurting. There's a lot of confusion, both among transgender people, etc., suicide rates, all this kind of stuff, but also even potentially within our own community. How many of our youth who maybe have, who haven't had that proper guidance, maybe necessarily at home, in terms of their deen, in terms of navigating these issues, who have been exposed to it at school, who don't have a great education at home, etc., etc. How many of them are feeling like a cognitive dissonance and an internal, spiritual disaster right inside, because they think, oh my goodness, I'm Muslim, I'm attracted to this other boy in school. How, what, I've got no clarity from home. My parents don't really talk about any of this kind of issues. The whole onslaught from the secular agenda is just this complete narrative, right, where it's just almost unbreakable. When we talked on Zoom before, we mentioned the idea of it being almost blasphemous, right?
Yeah.
For the progressive religion to step out of line in terms of their social beliefs, right?
Yeah.
And so how does that Muslim youth who hasn't got the guidance, how does he navigate that issue for himself? And that's actually something that we discussed last time on Zoom that I thought was really helpful. The idea that in Islam, throughout our history, the ulama, they were quite comfortable often discussing this, and they didn't kind of dramatize it as much as we do. So for example, there was this idea of, maybe if a guy is feeling attracted to another guy or whatever, then that's pretty normal in a sense. Okay, maybe they got a bit confused or whatever, but maybe they're just attracted to the feminine beauty of a boy, right? In school or something, and that I found was really helpful in my research for this issue, because it kind of de-dramatized the issue, brought it back to thinking, okay, how can we say, look, you're not because we're accepting their dogma, right? The LGBT dogma, we're accepting it. We've internalized it as Western Muslims, and we've accepted it, which is a bad move, because then we say, right, that boy, that Muslim guy who's confused, he's thinking, okay, I'm gay, I have to be in this whole different category of people, right? That's what they've done, the LGBT
Yeah,
movement.
exactly.
They've split it into categories, right? So if you feel a certain way, you feel an attraction, this or the other, maybe you're recognizing that female beauty in one of your, in boys in your school or something, and you feel attracted to it. Oh, suddenly you're in a whole nother category. Oh, you've got this label of bi. And as Muslims, we've got to reject that. No, you don't have this whole other label as bi. You're not this different type of human. You're like all of us. We may, maybe maybe I'm married one day, inshallah, and I'm, maybe have the issue or the struggle where I am attracted to, some lady from work who's not my wife.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing in a sense. You're just like, the message has to be to that Muslim boy who's struggling himself with these internal issues, that there's a clear path for this in Islam, and we're not going to accept the dogma from the LGBT. We have our own indigenous way of understanding this in Islam, right? And it's a lot clearer, actually.
You tied into a lot of clear points. You were talking about, I think you said a Catholic, person who his son committed suicide over this issue.
He wasn't Catholic, actually. He's an atheist. He's been put off by religion
okay.
because of the Catholic priest who told him that his son's going to hell, basically, after the funeral, which was the reason I brought that up is because we hear a lot about transgender suicide rates being through the roof, but I've never met somebody. This was the first time I met somebody who's had a personal experience with suicide. Like, this guy's son committed suicide, and as I was saying, the grief on him was just permanent. Like, it's palpable. You can see it with him. It's there in the air constantly with him, and it destroys people's lives, these things. So I guess what I was getting at there is that as Muslims, even though we can't compromise at all, it's out of the question. It wouldn't be helpful to anybody. It'd be damaging to anybody if we started compromising on our Quranic, on our Islamic just position, clear position. We still have to treat it with the utmost tenderness in some situations, and care and compassion, because there are horror stories like this, right, where a guy loses his son to suicide, and its whole world just comes crashing down.
Yeah, so we end up having to navigate so many things that this is not checkers anymore. This is a game of chess.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a game of checkers anymore, where it's just a simple, binary, not to use no pun intended, but it's not a simple binary world that we live in, like the olden days, where you could afford to do that, because we're dealing now with people who have so many different sensitivities. So we have to use our words, our language, our sarcasm, and our emotion very wisely, or else we'll end up becoming like a bull in a china store, right? Where Dawah is for sophisticated. The more the Prophet ﷺ said, the situation will come upon you, فَيُصْبِحُ الْحَلِيمُ فِيهِ حَيْرَانٌ, that the Halim, who is very cool, calm, collected, and very intelligent. Hilm does not just mean calm and slow to anger. It also means very intelligent. It means slow to anger because they're very intelligent, right?
Right.
He becomes bewildered by the amount of factors that come into play here. Right. And how, language and words whether we like it or not, they've become triggers to people. And that our message is not a simple one of just closing people out. The message is, and by the way, that's not even going to work, because like you said, our own youth have cognitive dissonance, right? On the issue. They've probably in most cases, I'd say 90% of the cases, whatever messaging from Hollywood stars, from YouTube, from TV, from politics, from school, from friends has reached them before religious teaching has reached them.
Almost always.
We've been beaten. We don't have the manpower to fight this fight, right? We can't reach everybody. We don't have the other factors of whether it's entertainment or otherwise, of marketing power, that the other side has. And so they've internalized these things, and you have to undo 25, false presumptions or false assumptions before you even broach the topic. Right. And that's where it's needed, this concept of That's why I remember in our initial discussion, I think it was with you, when I said that the real solution, the only solution that I find, is prolonged suhbah with people of learning, people of learning, so that you could, the levels of their, like the onion will be come off one at a time, and you can start seeing what this message of Islam has done to them, and what this followership of the Sunnah has given them in their life, where you see year after year, year after year, year after year, that this person is stable, trustworthy, and then their slip up is seen in light of that. Now, I actually have something where, I usually don't talk about my personal situation, but I coach in a league. I've been part of the league as a parent, as an assistant coach, as a full-time coach, right, for a certain sports league. And so, week after week after week after week, every year, I see the same group of people pretty much, right?
Yeah.
We don't talk like hi and bye and that's it. But, sometimes we do chit chat when I was assistant, when I was a head coach. There was a moment where I completely got so flabbergasted by an official, a referee. And I really just got so upset at him, right?
Yeah.
I got so angry with him, right? And in the context of it, I felt so terrible afterwards, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, these people, like, they might not know me, but they discover that you work in the masjid, they're gonna think, what was that?
Yeah.
So, like 50% of the people there know me, maybe 50% don't.
Right.
So I actually I felt for a whole week just so terrible, right? By the way, I was right. The league contacted me and told me that I was right, right? They contacted me not to apologize per se, but sort of to apologize, to tell me that I was right. Like, the call was beyond terrible, right? But they just said, we just hope that you realize that they're kids. The referee is a young kid and everything like that. I said, not only that, do I realize that I regret the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
I went out on my way and I, went out and got him a gift, whatever. And my son was like, why is this? You didn't have to do that much, right? I said, no, we have to make I believe Rasulullah's impression may be at this moment, because if they look at you and they look at, and they say, oh, you're the person in the mosque, and it's going to be very different than if my name was just Abdullah so-and-so and I'm an engineer, right? So I said, no, I really care about making a positive impression. And if I upset I upset this guy once, and I went and made sure that he was happy a couple times afterwards, right? Like, just by interactions, and I give him a gift. It's the same idea here, where we have to have a suhbah with, we want Muslims to, the only way to really give a da'wah is a long-term suhbah with Muslim youth, for example, where they see you in so many different spheres of life that they really know you inside out, right? And some people ask me, like, why do you do these things with the youth, and you go out in jeans and you go to the city, and is that what the fuqaha do? I said, look, I'm dealing with the reality that's in front of my face.
Right.
I don't have time to try to make a reputation for myself of a sheikh and have, like, I never change out of my thobe. I just can't afford to do that right now. I have to be on the ground, right? And you got to avoid the disasters before you produce something, pretty, right? So we say dar il mafasid, avoiding hardships, qabla, it comes as prioritized over jalb al manafi'. So yeah, it's wonderful to have in the community a sheikh who is always wearing the thobe, who only speaks what Allah said and his messenger said, and you only see him in the dars, and he worships Allah so well, that the nur is coming off his face. That's really good. But who's it good for? Only the one who has been trained to care, right?
You know what? That's such an important point, because actually, so a view that I'm really sympathetic to actually is that in terms of your da'wah as minorities, as Muslim minorities living in the UK, the kind of a really effective way that I found is actually shedding clothes that are not indigenous to the place that you are. So there is a way to actually be, and it's a little bit off topic, but it's actually related in an important way. Wearing clothes that are indigenous, for example, for me, to the UK, that are local and that are recognized, that are still meeting up to the Sharia requirements, right? So that that I'm still 100% Sharia compliant and conformant in that sense, in the principles and the rules and regulations in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also in a way that connects to the guy at school who I'm talking to, and my little cousin who's at school in the UK and who doesn't have a whole lot of guidance in his life, and who I'm trying to chat to and kind of and build a relationship and build a sense of trust to. He's gonna take one look at this guy in a thobe in the middle of February in the UK when it's snowing outside and think, what is this guy's Islam just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
it doesn't take into account the fact that you need to be warm in winter in the UK.
Yeah.
Like things like that. It's actually quite an important point, and I 100% agree with your point about conversations and relationships with people being the primary and one of the most important, if not the most important way in terms of relieving this cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah, and we're in a situation here where we're on the front lines, right? And it's like Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a strategy until you get hit with the first punch. So when we're sitting here, you have an option. One of the local kids in the masjid is not interested in being reached, so that like I said earlier, that the ideal sheikh and everything, who benefits from that? Only the person who's been taught to care by their parents or otherwise. All right. Now I got in the community, in the masjid, people who do not care, right? And he's got a whole bunch of ideas in his head that we find is a problem. It's going to be a problem for him, right? It's a problem. So how am I going to deal with this? And you literally have to make a decision right now. You can't sit there and make a dissertation about this. You have to decide within a few weeks to take action. And sometimes that calls for you to sort of, do things that a traditional path of a faqih or a student of knowledge would not do, right? But do you have a choice, right? Are you just going to let the kid? You can't communicate with people the way you want to.
Yeah, because you'll lose them otherwise.
Exactly. You have to communicate to people the way they can receive the communication, right? In a way that they can receive it. So younger people, they don't have the maturity or experience yet to realize that, I could, I have to respect this person's position. They just don't have that. It's not like, I could, bring a doctor from, or an engineer or a banker or whatever from my neighbors and say, hey, listen, I'd like for you to listen to this lecture. And he'd be mature enough to say, okay, no problem. I come and listen to it. And he appreciates that. And he recognizes that the person the scholar in front of me he dresses differently. He speaks a different language, but his logic, according to, his logic of his speech shows clearly he's educated. Yeah. And so he can respect that. And he could separate in his mind, okay, his language, his accent, his clothes is one issue. His points are another issue. Yeah. All right. That's really nice, but that's not humanity. That's a sliver of people. So it's where I say that we have no choice but to take into account the sensitivities that you mentioned, the fact that this issue of al-liwat and qawmuluts and all this other stuff is intertwined into now the family lives, family memories, like you said, suicides, all sorts of emotional traumas. Okay, right. So you're parent of a suicide, that's an emotional trauma. There's nothing less than a trauma, right? I don't overuse the word trauma, but how many people have experienced that? 0.001% of the population. So it's a trauma for sure, because it's a terrible experience that very few people go through in life. And that's where we have to become extremely sensitive, and I'm actually it's very hard for me to be sensitive, to be honest with you. It's not my forte. I'm not a caregiver or a sensitive type. It's just not my nature. But seeing that there are minds like MINES that could blow up in your face, seeing that the messenger of Allah's how people think of Islam and the Prophet is at stake, I have to. And if some people who are young and maybe immature, I think it's immature, and who are maybe inclined to extremes and they want to see blood, they won't like it. But that's something that we have to make them like it.
But
right?
you know what? It shouldn't be something controversial, because we're not. The thing is that nobody's calling, and the people who are on the fringes, nobody mainstream is calling for anything that is against the Sharia or like pushing the bounds of Islam. In fact, it's the opposite, right? People are calling for us to remain firmly and uncompromisingly within the bounds of Islam, and embody that most beautiful, or try increasingly to embody that most beautiful thing, which is the soft-heartedness, right, that the Prophet ﷺ embodied. And the key to the transformation that happened 1400 and what is it now, 1442 years ago, is one that was because of the overwhelming beauty and overwhelmingness of the Quran itself as a miracle, and because of the overwhelming beauty and soft-heartedness and just compassion and kindness of the Prophet ﷺ. And that can sometimes be manifest in being firm and being uncompromising on an issue. In fact, it often can be manifest in being firm and uncompromising on an issue.
I don't think
it should not be compassionate anymore. It should always be compassionate and sincere.
Yeah, and I don't think that a person who cannot balance both is strong.
Yeah,
something is weak about the person. And by the way, being weak is not a crime. Being weak is not a crime. It's something you have to fix, but it's not a crime. So oftentimes, if I'm tempted to something and you're tempting me and I'm weak on this matter, right? How am I going to react? With a great amount of aggression towards you, because you're actually getting me, right? And I'm about to fall for your temptation. But if someone's strong, okay, then it's quite easy for them to remain compassionate while resisting. And that's where it's funny that the Bush Republicans, they said compassionate conservatism, right? Which I mean, we're not going to take their slogan, but it's interesting. I mean, they came across the same thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, they came across the same idea, because that Republican Party, I don't know I don't think they have the same, they're exactly clear on it today, but that Republican Party was complete traditional marriage, right? And but they needed to, the marketing of it was that if you're against this, you're mean, you're insensitive. And then they go and sort of brilliantly, in a sense, like deviously, I should say, linking it to what the things that you just said, like suicide. Oh, so you're against this. Okay, so what about these suicides? It's like, my religion has anything to do with that, right? Is that what I said? It's completely. And I have this clip here where she did this to the poor imam. Let me actually find this clip. Let me play this clip.
Not about gay, lesbian rights and equality. This is purely about proselytizing a homosexual way of life.
So it's interesting that you use that word, proselytizing. You've also said that this is about indoctrination and recruitment. Do you think children can be recruited to be gay?
Well, you can condition them to accept this as being a normal way of life. And it makes the children more promiscuous as they grow older.
So you think that by being taught these lessons, children will possibly become more promiscuous?
Absolutely, yes.
And potentially gay when they wouldn't have been before?
Well, I mean, whether they become gay or not, but they can certainly enter into gay relationships.
So there is, the first misunderstanding from this reporter, where she says she imagines that the issue is a person's feelings about attraction.
Mm.
People tend to be surprised that that's the last of concern. You're not sinful for your attraction. It's a big problem for you because your parents expect you to get married, right? And you have an issue. I'm not saying you'd have a problem. Your life will not be the same if you're not attracted to women and you're attracted to men, or vice versa. But that's in Islam, that's not the issue. Allah himself does not judge a person on who they are attracted to, right? And he tries to, I think, explain that by saying that it's about what they believe. So let's listen on here.
We're happy to live with them, together with them, with mutual respect and tolerance. But that's not what they want.
But how can it be tolerant when you believe that they are trying to convert children to be gay? If you believe that's a possibility, if you tell them their lifestyle is morally wrong, how can you coexist in tolerance?
If someone who doesn't believe in my morals, I don't consider them Islamophobic. You can still live with mutual respect and tolerance, but this is more than that. It's like they want to convert you. They want to convert your morality, and that's just wrong.
Okay, so he did answer the question. He said it's not about them behaving as homosexuals, or becoming, homosexual in their attraction. It's about believing that this is a fine, right, and okay act, right? And that's the whole point. And that there's no way that a Muslim will ever budge on that. You see how it sort of was twisted up for the man there, and he did answer it properly, where it was sort of twisted as, and it does sound ridiculous. Oh, you think that just by learning a lesson the kid's going to change? Well, no, that's not our point. Our point is an issue of belief, right? And that's where the discourse on this, at some point, there's sometimes you have to say, look, we have our beliefs at the end of the day. And, you might differ with that, but that's fine. And that attitude, it's true. It gets the point across. It's not an exclamation point, right? However, it doesn't affect there's no negative there. If someone's looking on to that, let's say your friend who was or your classmate, I should say, that her mom she has two moms, that she say, okay, well, that's his belief and he's not budging from that. But if I would say, look, this is what we believe, that's it, you take your disgusting thing and leave, and I don't care whether you like it or not, at that point, what kind of reaction is that?
No, exactly. Exactly. It's the way you frame, you frame things, the way you talk about things. And some people are going to react badly. They're going to react badly, even if you say it in the most clear but compassionate way. They'll still react badly. They'll still go like, oh my goodness, that's so homophobic. How, this is the way people, how can you, it's just so unethical. And they'll just have this kind of condescending tone. They'll, it'll be ridiculous for them. And we can't change that as Muslims. We can't control their reaction. They're going to reject the truth sometimes. That happens.
100%. You cannot please everyone. It's not our goal to please everyone. And but it should not be because it's our fault. Nobody hated the Prophet ﷺ because of something the Prophet did.
Right.
And Allah even tells us it's because the ayat bi-ayatillahi yajhadun. It's because of Allah. The truth is what they hate. The Prophet ﷺ never gave them an ammunition to hate him or to mock him or to hate Islam or make kufr because of him. Okay?
And we're doing that, unfortunately. We're actually too often falling into the trap where we are giving people ammunition based on the way that we react to something, based on our characters not accurately being a mirror in some small way for the Prophet ﷺ's character. We're not doing that at all often in these discussions. And you're going to put people off, non-Muslims who deserve to have a well-balanced dawah, give it to them. But you're also going to push your own youth into the arms of the people who are so accepting of everything and anything, right? By letting your character your ego kind of make you into a shouty kind of aggressive person that puts people off. You're gonna increase the confusion for your own Muslim kids who are confused about this, and who need clarity on this. They don't need to be told that they're unnatural and there are different class of people and that this is ridiculous. They need to be sat down and talked to as people, and they need to be told, look, we're talking about the nature of attraction here, we're talking about the nature of beauty, this is halal, this is haram, and now let's talk about these deeper things, and have a conversation with them that's not going to push them into the arms of the people who are saying, they're all backwards, come here and live what you want to live. They need to be dealt with in a certain way that is clever, and that is not just clever but in a sinister way, not at all, but like smart but sincere, that you're trying to genuinely bring healing and peace to this,
and not only that, it's exactly like you said. There are two camps, and I think you sent me like a blurb here. Like, there are two camps here when it comes to this. There's one that's all music videos, and it's fun, and it's popular, and it's fashion, and it's now in the NBA, it's in sports, it's in everything. Okay, there's that, and then there's the little local neighborhood masjid and a few Muslims on the internet, right? And maybe my family or my grandma or grandpa or whatever. There is that. Now, again, this is not about, it doesn't have to have theory. This is something that's what we call in Arabic al-amr al-waqi', which is the affair that's right in front of your face, right? It has descended upon you, and that's the choice. So any choice that would, any action that would cause a person, non-sanctioned from Allah and his messenger, that would cause a person to go into the wrong path, then we are the fitna. Because the Prophet ﷺ got upset with a companion, Mu'adh bin Jabal, who, out of his love and zeal for the Quran and Islam, used to recite, he used to pray with the Prophet ﷺ in the city, in Medina, then go out back to where he lived, and his community in the farmland, which is a little further out, and they used to and then pray Isha with them, and you pray a long prayer, right? Alif Lam Mim Baqarah, and the Sahaba there, they're farmers. They have to get up early the next day. They would salam out of the prayer, and they would go pray on the side, and they would go home. Mu'adh bin Jabal was told that they're salaming out of the prayer, they're calling their own iqamah, praying with short surahs, and going home. Mu'adh said they're munafiqs, right? Now, this man came to the Prophet ﷺ and complained. He said, your student Mu'adh, he's closer to the Prophet. Mu'adh is accusing me of nifaq. And the Prophet said, Mu'adh, how could this be? He said, he salams out of the prayer. He wants to pray a small, quick prayer. And Allah says in the Quran, لا يذكرون الله إلا قليلا, right? They don't remember Allah except very little. So he doesn't like to hear the Quran, and he rather say small surahs and go home. The Prophet ﷺ told him, shorten the prayer, but he first said, Afattanun anta ya Mu'adh, are you someone who's causing fitna in people's deen? Right? You're causing them a fitna? Right. And so the Prophet ﷺ then said to him, shorten the prayer, because there's the worker, there's the weak, there's the elder, there's the sick, etc. Right? And so this is a serious issue, because it angered the Prophet ﷺ.
Exactly.
It angered the Prophet ﷺ. And so, as I said, those people who are flipping out, they're not the enemy. And we have this whole clip here that I only showed portion of it, but they're not our enemy. But it's not. It does. This is a game of chess now. It's not a game of checkers. There's a lot of factors involved, and their choices we have are not great choices. The choice of, okay, fine. I mean, I'll just do not. If we do nothing to act upon this and to take it seriously, the youth, that we deal with in the masajid, in our families and your friend circles, they will just go that other route, right? And the default, they don't have to actively go that route. The default of what a human being today, in the world today, I would actually, venture to say the world, not America, not England, the world, is a great sympathy for Qawm Lut, is at least a cringe feeling of any words that would go against Qawm al-Luts, right? And as I said earlier, and I said in other places, the position the position of Muslims is not just that we don't support something, it is to be against something, right? And he cannot sort of cut that language out of our platform. If we had a Muslim platform supporting certain things, not just it will be absent from our list. No, we are against it. We would like to see it, zero of it happen. Like, what's our position on alcohol? Muslims are against selling and drinking alcohol. No, we are for, that nobody drinks alcohol. Not that we don't want to drink alcohol. We hope to see nobody gets intoxicated ever again. Right?
Exactly. And that alcohol point is actually really interesting, because how do we frame it as Muslims when we're talking about alcohol? There's almost like, I don't know if you guys know about the NHS here in the UK, it's our National Health Service. There's almost 10% of referrals to the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, are in some way related to alcohol. When I have discussions with my friends about alcohol, non-Muslims and stuff, and we're having these debates and discussions, I'm framing it in a way, and we frame it in a way that we're talking about what is in people's best interests.
Yeah.
What is most damaging and hurtful and harmful to people. And by framing it in those things, sincerely framing it in those terms, what is actually damaging to people, what's most helpful for them, what's best for them, what will bring them peace, what will damage them. When you frame it in those terms, you make it clear that you're concerned about people, about them, you care for them genuinely. And that's what we need in this discussion. We need to frame things in the sense, it's that example that you gave, that story from the time of the Prophet, that was such a perfect kind of point to draw out from this, for this issue as well. We need to be talking about when we're framing this discussion, we need to be saying we're saying this because it's what's best for you, and it's not what's least damaging. And this is actually damaging for our society. It's hurting people. It's bringing we're in a society. There's a book, I think, by an American author called Prozac Nation, right? The whole nation practically is on Prozac.
Depressed,
depressed. They're all depressed. There's depression rates and anxiety rates, clinical depression, acute anxiety. It's through the roof in our age. People are confused. People are depressed. People don't know what's what anymore. We're trying to talk here about something that's clear and something that brings peace and healing. And we care about people. We don't want to push them into away from us into further hardship and harm. So we need to be framing our discussion and feel it in our heart in a way that's sincerely caring about people and what's best for them, what's not going to actually hurt them and damage our society. And when we start using that kind of language, then you'll see people's hearts open up. Some people will still reject it, but some people's hearts will open up. I guarantee that.
And at the very least, when at the very, very least, if we're totally rejected, we're not rejected because it's our fault, right?
Exactly.
And that's the first thing that you have to defend against, is that you are free from blame. Just because a person is doing dawah, they love Allah, they love His Messenger, not necessitate that he's free from blame, right? You have to do things in the right way. And like you said earlier here, if a person truly cares about a society, and here we are, we're in it, right? As long as we're in it, we might as well be invested and do things right. One thing that cannot happen, which the previous generation, and you can give them a pass for it if they were immigrants. I don't know if your parents are all immigrants, but mine were, right? But there is a limitation on how involved they can be in society just for the sake of culture, right? Many of them also had like a careless thing, like, you guys, I mean, we hate you guys, right? You look what you guys did to us, right? But that's a total cognitive dissonance in my point, because like, why were you here? Okay. Why would you're just in complete cognitive dissonance. Or at the very least, it was this attitude of like, we don't really care about what's going on. But if we're truly having this attitude that these are the creation of Allah, that we would hope that guidance comes to them, that's what we want, then that compassion should be visible in many other spheres of society. It's not just this one issue that you'll be harping on, right?
Yeah.
you would be involved in hunger
Mm.
crises. You'd be involved in many other things. Now, a person can't be in a thousand things at once, right? But you can be in at least one. Prophet ﷺ said, tell people about me, even if it's just one ayah. That applies to everything else. In other words, like, for example, you can't advocate or, do relief work in every single crisis, but
No.
you can have one at least. Don't get shut out. Don't be a zero. Don't be a goose egg, right? At least someone in society should testify that, these guys, they come around and they help out, right? And
And
that's
you know what? That changes discussions as well. That girl that I was talking to you about from this interfaith discussion club at school.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we were on good terms prior to that discussion and continued to be afterwards was because of a big part of those discussions in other sessions, not this one, was we were talking about the environment and environmentalism, and she was a vegan and she cared a lot about the environment, and I brought a lot to the discussion in terms of the Islamic viewpoint on this, right? So I actually think that people are insecure about a lot of these kind of things when they're coming at it from a Muslim perspective. But I took the exact opposite position and decided that no, Islam has the most to offer on this topic. It's not just that there's a big environmental movement going on at the moment, and you hear a lot of there's going to be nothing left for our grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, as a Muslim, that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
It's about the ayat of Allah in nature. The beauty. There's a reason that the Quran bangs on, not bangs on. I'm not going to use this disrespectful to say that, but repeats, like, and emphasizes again and again and again. It's interwoven with its spirit, right? The idea of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ayat in nature, right? The beauty of his creation, respecting it, protecting those signs, you know. So I brought that to the discussion on those topics when we discussed those things. And you know what I found? I found that these people respect. I went on a march, on an environmentalism march that we had in the UK here, with all my schoolmates. And this individual that I'm talking about, this girl who was brought up by two moms, she held up my poster and my on this march, which had an ayah from the Quran on it about thing. You know, what does that tell you about the potential for these discussions? When the daughter of two, where she's got two moms at home who raised her, can hold above her head a poster with an ayah from the Quran on it.
Yeah.
Because you've made that connection on you've branched out exactly like you were saying on different issues. People can see that you're a person who cares about the world, about other issues, about homelessness, about this, about that, and you're sincere in those beliefs. It's not just for identity purposes, because you're so woke, because you're young, you're this, you're that. No, your religion, your whole way of life is inspiring you to do these things. Well, then you can have a holistic discussion also about this issue about same-sex attraction. You can give your views in a respectful, compassionate, but clear, uncompromising way. And you know what? People are not gonna bite your head off about it. Actually, a lot of the time, sometimes they will, but a lot of the time they won't, and you'll have a really productive discussion on it.
Yeah, well, it can't be for marketing purposes. It can't be fake, and that's why I said that. It's truth comes out over years and decades. Like the truth, the reality of a person comes out over years and decades, because that's where ikhlas is not just tested by. It's tested by a lot of things. Ikhlas, or sincerity, is tested by many different things. But the last test of ikhlas is the test of time, where nothing happens, neither good nor bad, for years and decades. And that's really what tests a person's ikhlas, right? Imam al-Haddad was once asked, what is the reaction to a da'iyah? He said that, it could be a reaction of people follow him, people hate him, right? But he said in most cases, no, there will be no reaction. And that's actually a test of ikhlas. And so that's where I believe that regardless of what people think now, that your position is not extreme enough, it's not crazy enough, it's not loud enough, there's not enough exclamation points and flipping out. Others will think, well, your belief is so homophobic, so this, that, and the other, and they put whatever terms on it, right? Regardless of those, let's talk after years and decades. Let years and decades pass, and let's see the result. You know, let's see which community, number one, remains stable in itself. Number two, was able to transmit its religion to its kids and to, you know, its community. And who either fizzled out or found it to be so extreme they went to the opposite extreme, only time will tell. So let's wait. Let's each one go their own path, and let's see what happens. And then when people see the body of work, right? You know this phrase, body of work.
Yeah.
They oftentimes, their opinion will change. And guess what? Here's the thing. Even if their opinion doesn't change, it's the right way to do things.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And you're not doing it to change, exactly as you said, you're not doing it to change as some kind of strategic marketing way. That's not what Dawah is about. You're not trying to manipulate people. And obviously, it's you've got to protect your image. The Prophet ﷺ took that into account. At times, we see that in the seerah. You have to be aware of your image as a community. That's you know, you can't be naive about that. But the primary goal, the primary motivator is not you're not seeking to be, you know, to advertise yourself or market yourself in a particular way, in a very clever scheming way. No, it should come from a place of sincerity, that all of these people are Bani Adam, and they are entitled to a degree of dignity and respect from us as Muslims, in that we're seeking to first, of course, fix our own community, right?
Yeah.
Address that little boy who's or teenager, right? Muslim guy or girl who's got living with cognitive dissonance themselves and confuse themselves. But you know, we've got to address those things. We'll not lose sight of that.
Yeah.
But also anyone else and everyone, you know, they're both the same issue. That boy within our community, or that boy who's a non-Muslim.
Yeah.
They're both people with souls who need healing in their lives, who need the peace of Islam in their life. And that's the objective, to bring healing to people's lives, not to you know, to bring them onto your team, you know, like win them over into your camp.
Yeah.
Like we're not trying to win people over in a sense that, like, oh, come and join mine. You know, that's what cults do.
Yeah.
But Islam is not a cult. Islam is so not a cult. Islam is interested in questions of truth and meaning, and that's the discussion we're trying to have with people. And you're only gonna affect people's lives in a good way.
Yeah.
In our context of, you know, 21st century, you know, with things getting as crazy as they are, you're only gonna bring people healing if you can have that compassion and that sincerity and that, you know, humility to you know, to not shout in their face and push them into the arms of you know, of the secular way of life.
Yeah. So you know, like as you're saying here, as time goes on, things got to get more and more refined. They got to get improved, and the scene is always changing, right? And that's what it is. It's the scene that's changing, but our essence can never change. Our teaching and our belief, it will never change. Simple as that. Our approach may need to be adjusted, right? And that adjustment must have a basis in the book and the Sunnah, and nothing in commanding right and forbidding wrong, or in teaching the deen or what have you, makes any statement that requires us to be, you know, mocking, insulting, etc. Was there ever a time where there's mockery in Islam? Yeah, there is, and it's judged, right? There's a judgment of when. It's not an absolute, you know. You don't absolute. There is a time where there's mockery in Islam, and there is times when the Quran mocks something, or where the Prophet ﷺ created a name for Abu Jahl, right, as a mockery. Abu Lahab is a name of mockery. So mockery, sarcasm, these things do have a place. But what kind of matter is it? It's a maslahah type of matter. When your community, like, look at when the Prophet ﷺ, all of those monikers and those nicknames for people came about. It came about when they were in a weak position, right? And needed to instill some confidence, right? And and that they were truly being oppressed badly, right? We're in a different position. Are we weak? Yes, we're in a weak position. Are we being oppressed badly? Well, yeah, I can't really say we're being oppressed, right? This is a game of temptation and persuasion. They're trying to convince your minds. But in the end of the day, my point is that the utilization of these strategies of making fun of something, of mocking it, okay, it's all about maslaha. It's not absolute. There's a time, if you see that it can work, all right, then you may apply it, right? And if a person sees that, no, this is not going to work, this is in fact the totally wrong, it has negative consequences.
Yeah, it's going to be the opposite, right?
It's going to be the opposite. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the Sahaba, Ikrim is coming, so do not say anything bad about Abu Jahl anymore, right? And by the way, the transformation of the name Abu al-Hakam to Abu Jahl is not just from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, mocking him. There's actually an element of truth to that. He's actually saying the truth, because if his name was Abu al-Hakam, the man of the wise man, basically, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam changed it to the ignorant man, the one of ignorance, right? It's Abu does not always mean father of. It could just mean possession, right, in Arabic. So the same with sahib. Sahib doesn't always mean friend. It could mean keeper of or the possessor of. And so, the Prophet's actually clarifying truth here, that he's not a man of wisdom at all, because that's a misleading name. And we're not going to refer to him with that name. We're going to refer to him with his true name, which is the one of ignorance. But in any event, if someone was to say, oh, hold on, the religion is filled with mockery, and there is a time to do this and to annoy your enemy. Yes, I 100% agree. And because I'm the one who said this, I said that ghayth, to annoy your enemy, does have a place in Islam, because it makes them not think straight. And when they don't think straight, they don't succeed, right? It gets them emotional and riled up. However, there's a time and a place for everything. And if something would backfire against you, then you don't employ it. And I'm telling you, and it doesn't take any common sense, that when you're dealing with like a lot of Muslim youth, let alone non-Muslim youth, and a lot of innocent people who didn't do anything wrong to deserve that, it's going to backfire. And you're going to just let people go to the other side. They're going to find you to be an easy excuse. If I was 50-50 on the fence, now I'm not. Because if that's the product of the Prophet's teaching, no thank you, I don't want it.
And people are complicated, like the people that we're talking about, that we're talking to, that are dealing with these issues and struggling with them, they're not black and white in terms of in themselves. Often they've been secularized by their society, in part, in certain areas, just naturally, unavoidably, and often they'll still have that gem of faith still hidden somewhere inside of them, and that yearning. But so to deal with them with softness is often gonna just unlock that and be the calling and the healing that they need. And the other point I just go back to is what you were saying earlier, and what we discussed earlier, which is that those instances of mocking that we find, even potentially in the Quran or in Sunnah, etc. They would, that's being done by Allah, and that's being done by the most pure-hearted, soft-hearted, most incredible man to ever walk the face of the earth. It's not how are we so confident, in ourselves, that we're living up to that we're just throwing out this mockingness and this and these jests, etc., here, there, and everywhere. How are we that confident when often we're the chasm? It's often a chasm between our characters and not to kind of put us down too much or anything like that. Obviously, we all try, etc., to live up to his character, etc. But there's often a chasm between our embodiment of Islam and his on certain issues, and so we have to just give ourselves a reality check, a look in the mirror, and say, hold your horses. you're not, you haven't got you're not reached that point where you're sincerely getting angry only for the sake of Allah purely, and you're not letting your own kind of anger and rage and ego, kind of cross over into that. There's a big difference between anger for the sake of Allah in a pure sense, which is a beautiful thing and a pure thing and a needed thing. And there's a huge difference between that and the anger that's most commonly seen in a society, which ultimately comes from us, right?
And yeah, and a very important point that you're bringing, because someone might ask, well, how do you know my anger is this way or that way? Well, the answer very simply is that one of the things that Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Shaghuri, rahimahullah, passed away, that he said, or that he was described by, was that his anger was always very brief, and he could never be described as being an angry person, right? And so, did he have anger? Yeah, he had anger, but it was so brief, and it was always very quickly shifted out of that anger into even, something generous towards the person he was angry to. But the point being is that what is a sign of anger for the sake of Allah is that it's not constant, right? You're not always angry. You're not always mocking something. It's not like you got a personal hang up, right? It's not like that. And it's such an important feature that to realize that anger for the sake of Allah is always something that is rare. It's like, if that's the case, anger for the sake of Allah, and you're always angry, you should move then, right? Or I mean, if it's not the right, then who would want to join that religion? That if I join, I guess I'll have to be angry 24 hours a day. Yeah. And so that's the issue there. And the sign of anger that's based in truth is that it's actually quite rare, right? It's not something that is going to happen every single day. That means we really got to believe now that you actually have a problem. Your person or your religion is like that, right? And most people are not going to want to be part of that. So really good discussion, and I found this young man to be really thoughtful. I mean, who is more reckless, than me in the podcast to bring someone complete stranger on the podcast and put it on? But I guess, like, I'm a decent judge of character, right? And of people's content or approach to things, because we talked for about an hour that day. And I usually don't, I don't know why, for some reason I said, yeah, fine, let's talk. Right. And I think your emails were well worded. They were smart. And they just happened to get on my radar. And I think you asked too. Now watch this. I'm going to get like 30 requests a day to talk on Zoom, which is not going to be possible. Not because I don't want to talk to people, but it's just physically not possible. But this has worked out. You brought up some great points. And that's the whole purpose of this podcast, this Phoeniciety podcast, is, let's get a feel of what's going on the front lines, like, quote unquote, the streets, right? It's not the streets, but quote unquote, the streets. And you brought some, really good perspectives here. And I always and I've been taught, always remain in communication with those older than you, those of your age, and those younger than you. And that will, give a complete perspective of things. And you have to always be in communication with the elder and with the younger, as well as your own peers. And they said the elders, so you know where life is headed and what's really important and what's not. Your peers, so that you can measure your opinions on things against theirs in matters of judgment, and so that you can check your heart if your heart has jealousy or not. By being in touch with your peers, people are jealous of their peers. They're not jealous of the elder or the younger. They're jealous they have envy towards their peers. So if you're in constant touch with them, you're grading your heart. You're able to see if you have envy, and you're able to remove it and be part of the Jama'ah. And by being in touch with the youth, you can actually see what's happening, and where the future's headed, because whether we like it or not, the youth are our future. And my young man here, Ryan, you one day will be the elder to somebody else. And we have to keep on this link in this tradition of always being in touch with the elder, your peers, and the youth. And that in our religion, there's no shame at all in whatsoever in even learning from the youth, because if they have something good to say, it's said in scholarship, no one has truly attained scholarship unless they have studied with those older than them, those equal to them in age, and those younger than them, which means he's overcome his ego and he wants to learn, and he cares more about knowledge than ego. For me, I care so much about having perspective on what's going on in the world. And that's why, I always try to make sure to be in touch with young people. So
I
Ryan,
wouldn't be able to sit here and listen to that without making the disclaimer that the all of those kind of points and the perspective obviously have come from people, alhamdulillah, that have, people of knowledge in my life and the people around me. So I can't accept kind of ownership and responsibility for any of that, but it's such an important point. I mean, the elderly in the UK, I don't know how it is in America, but people just shove them in care homes. And I've actually been speaking to my grandmother a lot recently, and she just tells me stories about her past. She's English, so she tells me about how things were in England when she was little. And you know what? I learned so much from her. Even she's non-Muslim, but we're just talking, and so I mean I couldn't have more respect for what you just said. It's
I think it's actually something that's being lost in the society. Right. I think that for a lot of youth, they don't care for the elders unless the elder conforms to their views of things. Or a lot of elders, the youth have gone, so they're in such another world and they're not really obligated to talk, right? The way we are obligated, we got to know what's going on and we got to talk. And so as a result of that, we end up with a big disconnect. And
I saw a tweet recently. This girl was saying, "My aunt voted for Trump. She's dead to me."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Whoa, what?" I was like, "Hold on, I'm a Muslim. I can't stand Trump. I'm the last person who would ever defend him. But how can you say that about you? Go talk to your aunt. Go build a relationship or a connection. Don't say she's dead to you."
I actually believe that one of the biggest things that we have in our deen is this mix up of ages, right? The idea that you can talk to somebody, or that you should always be with, youth, or you should always be with a mix up of ages, where anytime you go out, it shouldn't just be adults out. I mean, sometimes there are certain things that are appropriate and not, but you're going out to eat, right? There should be no problem with some youth, some adults. That mix up of age, we see this in Ramadan, Taraweeh, everything. Mix up of the ages, I think it gives such an emotional support to people, right? And to me, it gives a feeling like we have a tradition that's being passed on. I don't have to be nervous about the future because I'm in touch with the people of the future, right? Youth, whether we like it or not, they're going to be the future. One day Allah's going to give them the reins and we're going to be retired, right? And we have to watch what they do with it. But if we were in touch with them, if we invested, and listened, that's the most important thing. And that's why I love listening to you. I also love to listen to elders because they make you realize that half the things you're actually flipping out on are not that big of a deal, right? Life goes on. It's always going on. Allah always brings different tests to people, and Allah is very forgiving. And there's going to be a time in your life where the happenings of today are not your number one agenda, right? You've raised your kids, and all you can do now is prepare for your akhirah. And I've seen many elders in my community that reach that point where I trust my kids. I have now a couple sons and daughters who are now in middle age. I trust them with the welfare of the grandkids and the community, right? And I think they could do a better job than I can. And that allows me to just focus on my own akhirah and everything else. And I've seen that, right? I've seen people who do that and who wake up, have breakfast with their wife, then open up the Quran, recite some Quran, and they take it easy, but they're purifying themselves and realizing, oh, that's where we're headed. Okay, good. I'm happy about that. That's really nice. So I can relax a little bit because that's where inshallah we'll get to. So I thank you very much for coming on, and who knows, maybe we'll do this again sometime, since it was I think a really fruitful conversation, and we'll see what people say and what kind of reaction we get to this podcast. Hopefully people will really benefit from it. I'm definitely going to share it with some of the moms and dads who have high school youth. So again, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to talking again soon, inshallah.
Inshallah.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام.